This week on Around the Coin podcast, we have Mike Townsend, Faisal Kahn, and Brian Roemmele answering what company will dominate peer-to-peer payments in the near future, as well as exposing where the opportunity is now for Venmo, Dwolla, Square Cash, and Google Wallet. Around the Coin podcast.
Today on Around the Coin podcast, we have myself, Mike Townsend, and my co-host Brian Roemmele and Faisal Kahn discussing peer-to-peer payments and the strategy behind Venmo, PayPal, Dwolla, and tips and tricks that will get them into the winning category in the next 5 to 10 years. I'd like to start off this podcast by Brian giving us a background on the industry and transitioning that into our discussion around each of the companies and what they should do today that will differentiate them and set them apart.
Thank you, Mike and Faisal. You know, person-to-person payments started when somebody picked up a rock or a shiny object and handed it to somebody else. Currency, started with cash. The first real abstraction of person-to-person payments where you didn't really give somebody an object, you gave them a number or, some sequence or some stand-in for that. Maybe the beginning of the check was in the 1100s AD, Knights Templar. Amazing story about this group. There's a whole lot of stories that may or may not be true, but there is a distillation of what they did. And one of the things they did was a financial system. And it started because people wanted to go to the Holy Land, and they were very threatened about carrying all their gold with them. So the Knights Templar would say, well, you're in London, deposit all of your gold there. We'll give you a piece of paper, and when you show up in Lebanon, you can hand this to somebody, and you'll get your amount minus our fee, of course. Later on, that became almost an entire banking system. In fact, it predated the Florentine banking system, where most historians will start banking by quite a long time. So what happened there? Well, we created a number, and the money didn't move, the number moved. That's where we are today. Not much has changed. Now the number is moving electronically, and we'll talk about that probably ad infinitum, about all the way down to Bitcoin, all the way up to PayPal. The money doesn't really move in a lot of cases. The number moves. So in person-to-person payments, where did it get its real, start? Well, of course, it was PayPal. But that's not how PayPal really got its start. It got its start because it was a payment system for eBay. And it's funny how we get this cultural amnesia, especially as high-tech engineers and technicians will sit there and say, well, eBay, that's a big thing, but PayPal is really about person-to-person payments. If you were to extract, even today, the eBay economy from PayPal, it'd be a radically different system. It would have to compete on a much different scale. Now, why is that important? When we create new technological products in the payment space and it becomes a person-to-person payment system, we look at that as the model. We forget that eBay was a walled garden that made it happen. If you talk to the original founders, just before they sold the company to eBay at PayPal, they would have told you that they were within days, of maybe weeks, of really going bankrupt. And it was the eBay economy that saved it. But when people start these new companies, say, I'm gonna make a friction-free way to send money from point A to B, but I'm not going to have the infrastructure that supported PayPal, there's some challenges. Does that mean PayPal's not successful in person-to-person payments? Absolutely not. It just means that we need to sort of temper our view and designing these products, its usefulness, and how it would actually wind up being used and deployed in the market as a whole. We're still in the infancy of this. I mean, this latest reiteration, it goes all the way back to the Knights Templar in the 1100s. We're in the latest iteration, and if you were to put that in a timeline, it's not even a blip of a second if you were to represent the entire span of history of this for a year. That's a blip of a second. So we're all learning. So there's no absolutes and there's no definitive. But I do have my own views on the direction it's going to go in. So I'll leave it there.
Faisal, I'd be curious to hear your perspective, coming from a different part of the world, living in Pakistan. I think there's an interesting dynamic between the sort of bubble effect, right? People in the States have, one system, many banks, but really we all have the ability to use the same tools. Before the show, I know that you asked for my PayPal address, and realizing that you really only had a few options. I'd love to hear, largely what are people using there, or what would be interesting to hear, at least from a dynamic on the different tools that are available, and maybe how that is an opportunity to companies, or what people would expect if they travel to that part of the world.
Sure. In this part of the world, the classical definition that's in the US of like PayPal is not really prevalent. Most of the peer-to-peer payments or person-to-person payments are done on the mobile. It's essentially branchless banking. In some ways, it's tied into the carrier. You have to use the same carrier and the same bank to be able to transfer money. There are very, very few players that can actually are ubiquitous to the bank or the carrier, and you can send money to anyone. But there are large players. I mean, everyone you talk to, seems that PayPal is the big giant in China. For example, Alipay is huge, and huge by a margin. Just to give you an example, I think PayPal has about 110 million or so active users. Alipay has a little over 550 million, and I think the number is closer to 600 million.
Wow.
Their registered users are closer to about almost 800 million now. And you're talking about an ecosystem of approximately 700 million people on average using a person-to-person payment system in China alone.
And Alipay is scheduled to actually, I mean, if you look at the last 2 years, it's exploded, and the chart is going off. It's going off.
Yeah,
so it's
I think
big growth.
The only market that they've actually expanded out to, and I think I may be wrong here, but I think it's Korea. And they have yet to go down to, for example, Singapore, Hong Kong, the Southeast Asia bloc, the ASEAN countries, so to speak. And then there's the SAARC countries, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan. But, I mean, the market is absolutely huge, but the providers are very, very limited, very in their own silos operating. They're not much. There's not much interaction or interface with the Western payment systems like PayPal or Skrill or Yandex and so forth. They're very, very bifurcated, if you will. So huge potential in this part of the world, and so far, insofar as we know, it's predominantly mobile. It's not smartphone based, it's not email based, it's predominantly mobile and used by the lower class, so to speak. For a laborer sending some money across to his family across the town or across the countryside, microtransactions, but in the billions.
That's interesting. I'm gonna go out on a ledge and say that I think Venmo in the next 2 to 5 years under the acquisition of Braintree is going to be ubiquitous when people think of transferring money from one person to another person when they're not sitting in front of their computer, which for the average person is 99% of their life. Say 90% of their life. I think the reason why they were able to just really grow so fast is that they, similar to a Instagram where all the buttons, all the user experience was just in the right spot. I think if you give Venmo to the average person and just say go, they'll run with it and love it. PayPal has essentially the same features, the same technical capability, but for years I think people just didn't use it, and that's what the founders saw as an opportunity. That's what I see as really interesting from a liquidation of value perspective, at least across the States, where now you have people when they go out to a restaurant, you can easily split a check by having 1 or 2 people pay for it and just Venmo the difference, right? And the nice reminder features are fantastic for subtly reminding your friend that owes you $7 for pizza or something. So I think they've seen a tremendous amount of growth just from those small details to the product. You don't have to log in every time you open the app. I think that's a big deal. You don't have to, press more than 2 buttons to send a payment. So I think, if they continue to focus on product, I can't see why they wouldn't win. I think, Brian, it'd be interesting to hear your perspective. I've only used Square Cash personally, maybe 5 or 6 times. Never did I feel really comfortable in the email portion of it, partially because I felt like it was a vague description that need to go into the header or the subject. And when I try to pitch this to other people, try using Square Cash, I notice the resentment is, what if I have $2 signs? What if I have, an extra 5 and I send it quickly? And I know you can make mistakes in other forms of payment products, but I feel like the ambiguity in what should go where largely deters people from adopting Square Cash.
I really good point, Mike, and I definitely agree with you on Venmo. I believe that they have a huge opportunity, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But Square Cash, the challenge that they had is they wanted to make it simple. And I understand that. And simplicity is beautiful, and it's editing to its finest detail. The problem is if you make something too simple, and you can talk to people who engineer cars, people who engineer consumer products. Sometimes, we don't want things ultra simple. And the reason is there's something called cognitive trust. This is your mind subconsciously deciding whether you're trusting what you just did was correct. Let me take the accelerator pedal of a car, if I can digress for a moment. For years, people wanted to try fly-by-wire. Essentially, you press a pedal and there's no hard connection between the accelerator and, quote-unquote, the carburetor. Well, when they first started designing these things, there was a great deal of research that had to be done because they had to weight that pedal and design it in such a way that the reaction time and everything was exactly correct. And Tesla has done a tremendous amount of research in that area. You didn't think it was really working right. Same thing with braking systems. So, all right, what does that have to do with payments? Well, when you're sending money and you're kind of closing your eyes, it's an act of faith, you really have to study each step that's involved. My heart breaks because classic of what you hear from me is there was not enough empirical study in how people are going to use these systems. I would hand it to Google that they actually did a lot more study in this. And my experience has been that the result is Google is somewhat more successful in creating that level of trust that you've done the right things, the cognitive trust. Square has some challenges, but there's a bigger meta issue that's here. 33% of money transacted between people in the United States today is written by checks. Why is that? Why is 33% of the entire value of all money transacted in the United States still on checks? If I had a daughter in college and I had a Chase bank account, why would I use these other systems when I can just go to the bank and it's relatively easy? At one time, we could make the argument it was too complex. There's too much cognitive load into getting it done. But why would I, not do that? Well, fact is, people are doing that, and there's a fairly significant growth in that. So you start looking at the segmentations of who's using these systems. And it's funny because I'll do it, you just did it, and probably Faisal will do it. We always use that atypical example of a buddy that didn't pay their part of the check. The problem is that's cultural relativity. The vast majority of the world, let's call it the U.S. world, little cultural arrogance here, the world is the U.S. But let's just say in the United States, what are people using person-to-person payments for? We can speculate, and that's typical. And a lot of founders of startups, a lot of these payment companies we mentioned, they didn't do the empirical study. Why are people using checks? Well, I want to disrupt the check. I want to disrupt cash. It's hard to send cash. Mm-hmm. If you start a business on an invalid foundation, perhaps you might win at some end game, but to me, it's backwards. It's like, why is this dad sending his daughter money? Well, because he's responsible to pay her expenses, right? He made that commitment. Now, somebody might say, well, she's technologically literate. Everything in her life is, mobile. Why would he do it that way? Well, because it works for him. There's two sides of the transaction. You have to get both parties to agree on using the system. Now, if the cultural relativity of the older person is their checking account and the bank has made it relatively friction-free for the individual sending that payment, fundamentally, you have a huge challenge to move that individual who's the sender into that space. So we start with that premise. Who's using it and why are they using it? Now, I've studied this marketplace fairly intently. Now, there's overlap, right? A lot of people are using person-to-person payments to pay small merchants. That's where the overlap comes from Square. That's certainly the overlap in PayPal, Venmo, and another layer of new startups that will be coming in as we speak. Literally, there's about a dozen that want to enter into this market. Now, the question is, how large is the liberated market, the ones that are, I need to spend money, I need to pay a buddy, my half of the rent or something like that. How often does that come up? Is that a repeatable event? You know, these are open questions. And what's the dollar volume? And is this a sustainable business model? So we take steps back and we say, well, then I guess the bigger question is, how do we liberate some of those checks? Well, some of those checks are business to business, and there are 6 or 7 zeros on the line. Now, we talk about cognitive trust. The reason why a lot of payments on checks between businesses, the reason why businesses still use checks is a cognitive trust issue. They know it works. Mm-hmm. So there have been many companies that tried to disrupt the check by getting in the middle between business to business payments.
Do you think checks are just too high? They're too high in the tree. You know, start small, start with a piece of pizza, get people comfortable with it, and
perhaps,
then,
you know, perhaps. But I think the market is actually, once you start studying the segmentations in the market, all right, in the United States, who's using PayPal the most outside a buddy paying for a slice of pizza and you know, somebody paying a bit of rent? Migrant workers, just like Faisal was saying. A tremendous amount of money is going to, you know, in the southwest of the United States, and maybe most of the United States is going to Mexico and South America. And they're paying for their families because they're coming out here. Some of it's going to Africa. You know, in other parts of the world where there's a high degree of migrant workers. Now, that's a slightly different scenario. Now, the recipient side of that transaction is a part that you worry about. You know, when I send money to my parents or to my family, how are they going to redeem it? How are they going to get to it? And there's a lot of complications there. So we're not really talking about one market. Once again, if we don't, and a lot of people dislike this because I constantly fragment things because you have to. And then once you fragment, then you can come backwards. You know, you start there from the fragmentation. You go backwards from there. You know, we have that market. We have the friend paying a friend market. And I think about 99%.
When you said that market, that's business to business?
Okay, well, let me break it down. We have migrant workers moving money, always usually out of the United States. You have business to business, which is huge. It's a substantial portion of the check usage. By the way, check usage on an aggregated basis has gone up 3.2% over the last 3 years. It's trending down. But the growth in the economy is making it, you know, 3.2% higher. This breaks the hearts of a lot of people because all of us entrepreneurs want to try to find a way to get in the middle of that.
Well, that's just the first category, right?
Trillions of dollars.
You're saying migrant worker payments. I'd be curious to hear.
Migrant business to business, and then you have the greater market, if you will, and that fragments into. We don't have time for the show, but the common thread is, you know, and every payment founder I've talked to that wants to be in this market or is in this market will pull out the obligatory, I want to pay my buddy my side of the tab.
And
it's
how
almost
big
like,
is that? You know, give a sense of,
it's very small.
And relative
very
to
small.
What are they missing? What's the big pie that they're just not seeing because they're not using it?
Well, first off, empirically, you don't have to go out and research that necessarily at this moment, but just trust me, think about how often that really happens in the real world. And really, let's talk about this. The idea is, okay, people don't carry cash. Okay, which people are you talking about? Because here's what I did. Instead of just theorizing on this, I conducted about a dozen studies over the last 15 years. You want to know? There's a group of people maybe 50% of the population that consistently carries cash. It's not us. It's not males. It's females. And if you do this the right way, and you don't become a cat about it, you can research what women are carrying in their purses. And you'll find out that women still carry checkbooks if they are the head of the household, and they are the head of the household because they have control of the money. So there's still a checkbook in there. And they might use it if they're younger. They still might use it in some scenarios. They're certainly using it at the doctor. They're not, medical payments is still primarily paid by check. And that's a psychological thing behind that. And I can get into that. But they're carrying a lot of cash. So if the woman is sitting at the table and it's her and, she's paying her part of the check and the guy's not paying his part of the check or the group, she's going to pull out cash. She's not going to pull out her smartphone and say, let's find a way to make this happen. She's going to say, $7 and here, $7 and here, I'll leave a tip. And so there's a problem there. Now, can that be solved as a problem? Yeah, but you know who's trying to solve the problem? Us guys. And we're really young guys.
That is a good point, Brian. By having the females who traditionally run the house have a very little say in any sort of startups. That's about as far away demographically as you can get, right? The mother from the startup guy who's actually building it.
He doesn't even talk to his wife. In fact, and I can go to any age bracket, and each age bracket has its own color. It's funny. As the guy gets older, it's I don't even care. I don't look at it. I just signed the checks. He thinks he is, but in reality, he's not even in control. And younger guys are busy building things to change the world. And when I sit down to people who are founding these companies, and this may sound arrogant, and this is a further thing. The reason why I'm here even talking about this is because it's the opposite of arrogance. I'm trying to inform people that you're starting from the completely wrong reference frame. You have to really look at the world from the eyes of a scientific researcher who's has no balance in any direction. They're just impassionately looking at the fundamental bases of everything that's taking place. Now you're looking at the payments and say, okay, person-to-person payments. I challenge anybody listening to my voice today to go out in the greater world, and let's not even start with your mom because that is a guarantee. I'm going to win that bet. But go to somebody within your age bracket and say, we're out to dinner and you need to pay your part of the check. What are you going to do? I tell you, I already did this research, and I'll bias it a bit, but do it yourself, confirm it or disconfirm it, and contact me through Quora. They will first tell you, how much money do I owe? $7.12. Oh, pull it out of my purse. Well, why do you have your purse? Why don't you just carry your smartphone? I'm not even going to go down that road. You're not going to get purses away from women. Yeah, no, we're never going to get there. Women will never give up their purse. And and again, I'm not trying to be, starting a gender war. This is a fact. Every woman will pretty much admit it. So, all right. They have their purse, so they have their wallet, and they have their smartphone, and they have untold numbers of things in there. It becomes, wow, how did you get that in there kind of thing. All right, so now you have money. So, I'm going to spend the $7 and change and give you a quarter, right? All right, what's the second thing? Well, I got my checkbook, and if I really have to, I write a check. Then after that, deer in the headlights. I guess I can do PayPal. See, us guys are wired so radically different that our desire as technologists, especially, because we represent not just guys. We're now in another strata. We're the 1%ers. We're the ones that are the early adopters.
But Brian, bring it back to if you're a startup founder and you're sitting there imagining the world as you see it, as you experience it through your eyes, and you're trying to figure out, I want to get into this, peer-to-peer mobile payments game. Where is the opportunity? Where is the market share? And of course, you have to look demographically, right? Like our mothers are going to spend different than we are. But say out of a whole, if you just assume all the people are the same, that's a big assumption. But what are the categories, right? You have going out, you have paying rent. What are the other major things that someone might miss in terms of peer-to-peer transactions? Is the large percentage of the market really on those small things, paying people for odds and ends? Does that tend to aggregate all together and make up a large percentage of it?
Well, let's first look at the hidden agenda of some of the startups that are in person-to-person payments. The hidden agenda is to grow their wallet size, accounts on file. Okay. I don't think I'm exposing anything that's, in fact, I'm not. I'm not exposing anything confidential here. But I think anybody who studied the market enough knows that Square Cash was invented for only one single reason, and that is to grow as many accounts on file as they possibly can to compete with PayPal, to compete with Amazon, and to compete at some level with Apple. The problem is it's not the best feed mechanism when you don't have the walled garden of Apple, Amazon, or eBay. And well, then you have to ask yourself, well, how can you create a walled garden? Well, let's start Square Market. See, now all of a sudden the decoder ring is out there. It's like, why is a company that was doing exceedingly well, singly focused, gotten themselves into so much more other complex market with so many competitors? Well, it's a very simple thing. We got to get as many cards and files possible to grow the wallet, and maybe at some future date, our dreams of having a wallet, pay with your name, et cetera, might take off. You know, I have my own opinions about that. There's another show, but that's what it happens is other entrepreneurs see it and say, "Wow, there must be something there. Look at everybody's in it." Well, take a few steps back and look at what the agenda is. You know, is Square getting any income by moving money back and forth through Square Cash? No. Is it costing them? Yeah, it's a net negative. At some future date, they're going to have some magical powder to, sprinkle on all this, and it's going to, unicorns are going to pop out and rainbows and make money on it. There's no way, because essentially, at some point in time, you will always have to be free to some level because there's going to be so many competitors. And one of the competitors I suggest is Amazon. And we've talked about all the other players. Amazon's moving headforth into this market at a rather rapid pace. This summer, we're going to see Amazon doing things in payments and person-to-person payments that we just wouldn't have even thought of. So the future is going to be quite cloudy.
Faisal, what do you think? I mean, do you think that a lot of these peer-to-peer are really lead gen? Because I think Brian brings up a good point by saying when you make larger transactions, you have to be confident, extremely confident that they're going to work. And the only way you can be confident in anything in this world is if you used it many times. So, for instance, I pay my rent, of course I'm a small demographic and a small, one data point, but I pay it on Venmo. I, pay my landlord on Venmo. And I only do that because I've used Venmo maybe 100 times in the past. Otherwise I'd be writing a check like everyone else. So does Venmo look at it and say, and other companies that are doing this in the right way say, let's give this away for free. Let's get this, Square Cash or Amazon or, any sort of peer-to-peer mass consumer play, give it away for free at the small scale, get them comfortable with it. And by the time they're ready to, when they're comfortable with it and they want to make larger payments, they're going to go to us. Is that what Braintree looks at with Venmo and saying, we want people using this product, and when they get really comfortable with it, we're going to have, the next level up. I mean, it's worked in many other product lines, right? You give away something free and then you upgrade later. You think that's sort of the...
Well, one thing for sure, Brian said right, is they're trying to increase the wallet. The wallet is also a source of free funding. It's, a lot of money that you're holding on to. That's a good business case by itself. The other thing is that the U.S. has the ACH problem. There is no real-time settlement. You don't have so many wallets like these in UK or Europe per se, because you can pay electronically and the funds get settled in 15 seconds or so, at least in the UK. But I think, players that did not have an ecosystem, for example, as Brian puts it, a walled garden like PayPal had, eBay, etc., and so forth. Players that did not have that then had to look at something. Venmo says, well, pay for your pizza, what have you. But if you look at the case of Dwolla, and that's a very interesting case for me, because they said, how can we reduce the 3% or so that debit cards or credit cards charge? How can we make that go down to zero? So they looked at a very niche market. They said, let's go after this thing. Their inherent problem that they're trying to tackle is if you have to charge, what's the equivalent of cash online? I think it was in their pitch, their intro video that they had. What's the equivalent of cash online? And there was none. Wallets are trying to do the same thing, but you have to load your wallet through your bank account, which takes a couple of days in the US at least, or the instant way of doing it is a debit or a credit card, which has a cost associated to it. Dwolla is making, I think, fantastic progress by itself as it is in defeating that market. Venmo and other players like Pop Money and so forth, they'll have to carve their niche out, and I think eventually they will settle at something. Venmo could be the standard of paying in restaurants for, I don't know if they want to hear that, but it could be the standard of paying restaurants or for laundry or for your rent or what have you. I did a small survey. I asked a couple of friends in the US how many have PayPal. Almost universally everyone had PayPal. I asked the same question on Google Wallet. Just happened to be my friend who works at Google had to have one because he's in that department. But if I asked others, do you have Venmo or Dwolla? None. They didn't have it. They just didn't see a need for it. For them, it's either PayPal, cash, credit cards, or a check. They just couldn't seem to justify throwing in Venmo in. But I think Venmo has a very good chance because the people behind it, and especially now that they've merged with Braintree, will find it. They'll carve the niche out. I don't know what that niche is.
Do you think your friends are using PayPal completely, exclusively in front of a laptop? Or do you think they're actually whipping out their smartphones and logging into the PayPal app and sending money?
Right now, I would say predominantly laptops.
I think that's where it is. I think the difference there is that if you ever want to send money on the go, and usually that's small amounts of money, you want to do it in your phone. You don't want to be on a laptop because you might forget.
I see, and I asked myself this question: why is there a need in the U.S. Where I need to pay you, you need to pay me? That need is actually very small because everyone, U.S. is a very different society when it comes to how money is spent compared to, let's say, Europe or Southeast Asia or Africa and so forth. In Africa, for example, if you look at Kenya, everything is bought with, through mobile money, from your tomatoes to your groceries to your milk to your house rent, everything. So there's a lot of traction for that dollar going back and forth on the same network. In the U.S., because of the barrage of choices you have, you can choose PayPal or Google Wallet or check or ACH, etc. In the other countries, they don't have these options. The options are very limited. And then the second thing that comes into play is there enough traction in the U.S. when it comes to person-to-person payments, specifically? And you have to drill it down. And I think if you start drilling it down, you start seeing a very different pattern. How many times am I paying someone for pizza? How many times I'm paying someone for rent? How many times I'm paying someone because he borrowed $20 from me or I borrowed $20, I got to pay him back, etc. I think you'll start seeing very different solutions. It's just like the restaurant or the supermarket checkout. They'll take a check, they'll take a debit card, a credit card, or like a taxi. They'll take your debit card, cash, and eventually they'll take PayPal, Pop Money, Venmo, Dwolla, what have you. Because the market is so huge. But very interesting play how it'll come out, because you have to convince a person, well, why do I need Venmo? Someone may just take Venmo because they see you using it, but by themselves, do they just go on a website and they see something like this and say, well, I think I should sign up for this thing?
Here's an interesting conversation that happens internally at startups, is that Venmo gives out $5 to the person who signs up and the person who signs that person up, right? So they have a $10 acquisition per user. There's a lot of debate internally in startups as to when does this work, when does it not work, when does it actually hurt you, right? Because if you start incentivizing people by money, they might assume that your product is flawed in some way. I think Venmo, they actually started for about the first year and a half, 2 years with $1, and they actually bumped it to $5 referral fee. I don't know that Google Wallet does that. I don't think Dwolla does that. And it'd be interesting to hear. Do you guys agree with it? I generally think it's a good idea, especially for the recipient, the person who's questioning it. Knowing they have $5 in, they're way more likely to create the account.
Well, that's just a form of incentivizing it. So nothing wrong over there. I think Dwolla does it because if you look at their $10 or less, there's no fee. It's free. So isn't that incentivizing it? I'm sure there's. The last time I checked, there is a cost to move money, no matter how small. And if Dwolla does it for any transaction less than $10, it's free. They're incentivizing it. So if Venmo. So if Venmo's paying out $5, why not?
I think there's a big difference there, though. It's subtle, but it's big, because if you offer someone $5 versus saying, I'm going to allow you to save $5, people inherently digest that differently, right? They'll actively sign up right now for an account if it has $5 in it that they can pull out and send it to their debit account, their checking account. But if you say, hey, if you use this in the future, I'm going to save you up to $5, I'm not sure it's as compelling.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I was talking to someone and they were speaking of, will Venmo go international, or will Pop Money go international, Dwolla will go international, and the argument was, well, they can't go international, not anytime soon, not for the next, let's say, 2 or 3 years, and the reason being is they need to have certain amount of traction in the U.S., certain amount of numbers, certain amount of transactions going through per day, where they feel they have saturated their market share. And they will only get a certain percentage of the share, be it 1%, 2%, 3%, whatever it is. But once they've saturated their share, only then they will go international. So I think the intent for paying $5 is to try to get those numbers up, because I think they have a lot of pressure to get those numbers up and running, because you don't know. Well, I guess we'll touch upon Bitcoin and everything else, but those payment systems are out there to essentially destroy all these such wallet systems that we have, especially the credit card and the debit card associated wallets. So I think incentivizing it is not a bad thing at all. Mm-hmm. Maybe the way they do it, that may be a turnoff for some.
Yeah.
Let me weigh in on the incentivization. It's apparently how PayPal, X.com is really how they built their very first infrastructure. Now, they were in a very unique position because the concept of this online wallet that X.com was inventing was supposed to be a universal wallet. There were a lot of different variations floating around there. There was CyberCash and things like that. Company I did a lot of work with, First Virtual. But they were creating this concept of a wallet. Nobody really thought about that. Now, they incentivized it. It originally was a couple of dollars. It went as high as $50. It was quite a bit. That was based upon a mathematical model, which I have a copy of, that was put together.
Can you share that publicly?
Essentially, no. I wish I could. It was given to me in confidence, and more in my memory. I still have it, but it's more in my memory.
The concept was, you can share it in confidence. It's no issue.
There you go.
Yeah, well, we won't tell anyone about this, Brian.
No, this is a secret, just between all of us folks listening. No, but here's what basically was going on. It was a study of the network effect. Rather early than what we understood the network effect was here today. And it was also the study of how maybe printers work. You give the printer away for free and you sell the ink, or what a lot of people call the razor blade model. It really goes back to the bottle cap model. You can read my study of the razor blade theory on Core. It's really a very interesting study. But at the end of the day, the idea was you had to introduce a new concept to somebody, so you had to pay them a lot of money. Once they had that concept, they needed a way to use it. So once you got $10, $50 in there, what did you start doing? Well, they made it a little bit more difficult to remove your money. You had to, register a checking account, and then you had to wait so long. So they created barriers. And then at the same time, they were trying to rebelliously interact with eBay, even though eBay had their own payment system. Finally, that whole thing was solved when eBay acquired the company. But at that point, that incentivization would not have been necessary. All eBay needed to do is what they did, is they de-emphasize the ability for you to easily interconnect another payment vehicle. And so that question always comes up. It's anybody who's really studied this will automatically bring me to the PayPal model, and they'll tell me exactly how that happened. And I would say, well, did that really make PayPal or X.com? It might have brought their attention up, but did it really build the company? The answer is it might have built a company to be aware in the eyes of PayPal executives to acquire it. But I assert the acquisition took place not because of the number of people using the system, but because of the really high order technology that was being put together and some of the brilliant minds that are at PayPal. We're talking about some of the best minds in payments at that particular era, gestated out of there. And I think eBay was hoping that most of those guys would stick around. And it was early days, and people didn't really understand how these people would spread like dandelion seeds and start other businesses. So there we have it. We have people saying, I can give somebody $5, $10, and I'll be just like PayPal and will grow. Unfortunately, that's a flawed thing. That's not exactly what happened. Now, am I against incentivizing people? No, absolutely not. I think it's a great way to introduce people to a service. But what is your next step? When X.com incentivized, they were hoping that sooner or later you would use that to connect to your eBay account. There is a connection. So if I incentivize you $5, what am I hoping for you to do with it? Am I hoping for you just to have somebody else in a multi-level marketing pyramid scheme? Hopefully that you find somebody else who finds somebody else. Now, okay, great. Now what have you achieved? You've achieved this great pyramid of everybody with $5, but you just don't have a road connected to it. There's a piece of land by where I live. It's a beautiful piece of land. There's no eminent domain, and there's no right to access to that land. So it just sits there, and it's been sitting there for about 100 years because of the Spanish land grants. This owner is trying diligently to essentially carve through a mountain. There's a reason why it's so hard to get there. You're landlocked. You are absolutely landlocked if you created a great structure of people with money and no way to use it. So we're talking initially, what are some of the low-hanging fruits on the tree for quote-unquote person-to-person payments? Mike, you just said it. Unfortunately, that's really not a person-to-person payment. That's a commercial transaction. See, I say that's a good way to build a payment system. Sure, find the things that consumers are paying for and make a way to build technology so that both sides of the transaction are really incentivized. Now, one could argue that if you're living in somebody's house and you're paying for a room, or you're living in a two-family structure and the guy downstairs, you pay the rent, sure. But I would signify paying your rent as a commercial transaction. So now, unfortunately, this also starts narrowing the field. Narrows the field on what is really a person-to-person transaction. Now, does that mean that there's no need for it? No. But what it does mean is that we're going to become highly nebulous and stratified on what is a commercial transaction and what is a person-to-person transaction. And I think, if you were to give me a knife and I were to take this apple pie in front of me and cut it, it would take me 90 cuts to get to an atom, right? Stratification. Now, that's a funny way to see the world. I use that analogy, and a lot of people, their mind are blown. They're like, 90 cuts? Yeah, if I can get the sharp enough knife, let's call it a laser, it just takes 90 cuts for me to get down to a single atom. When you're starting to study this business, any business, especially payments, you have to get to the stratification levels. You have to get to that atom. And you have to look at it and say, okay, now we have people at a restaurant. We have people at a restaurant that want to pay the tab. How likely is that? Well, I would say if you want to do the statistical analysis, and a very good friend of mine did this statistical analysis, I can't speak freely about it because it's extremely, extremely well done work. It's not a study I did because I do other studies, but I would have done this if he didn't. And he got down to the atom. He got down to the 90th cut.
What did he find?
So I will call this the 90th cut scenario. So now when you get to that final cut, what did he find out? Well, it's so statistically insignificant for using person-to-person payments to pay for a dining check that it's almost an irrelevant event. So now you start expanding upon that. Okay, let's get to the 90th cut. Where are the different atoms, and what composes it?
Bring it back so we know, just give it a little more tangential aspect to it. Are we talking about the atoms are relative to the volume of transactions going through any sort of peer-to-peer market, anything consumer-based?
Let's call it use cases.
Sure.
Let's call it use cases. And then each use case, unfortunately, is not going to be a substantial amount of money. Unfortunately, that's how life works. You're going to go down to the very,
True.
we're all, we're all going to go down to the very low levels, and then we got to work our way back. The problem is when you're inventing something, you want to be Babe Ruth at the home plate and point out to the home, the far field and say, I'm going to make a home run. Well, that's nice, and that happens. But it's so rare. Again,
so what can Brian? What can people learn from what's been done already? If you take a step back for a second and say, why does this even matter, right? Why are we even talking about mobile payments? Why is peer-to-peer even significant? Is it about total transaction flow? Is it about value that people get out of their ability to pay, other entities? Level Up's a great example of a company who takes a very, person to business approach, right? They want to be the best way to, right now, they are the great way to pay a business. You can walk in, scan the phone, pay and walk out, right? It's actually very smooth if you know how it works and the store knows how it works and, everything's set up. Of course, that's
a big if though.
That's a big if, right? And they're having like questionable, growth because of it, right? Because there's a lot of big ifs and there's a lot of fragmentation in small businesses, right? Small merchants, brick and mortar stores, which is really their demographic, right? And then you have like Stripe and PayPal, Stripe and Braintree, and a number of other services allow you to accept payments online.
They're addressing a completely different industry. Stripe, Braintree, beautiful companies. Venmo, beautiful companies. PayPal.
It shows you, say for instance, Square. Square is fantastic, and they made their early jump on the Square dongle, which allowed a small merchant who didn't want to carry around what do you call it, the terminal, the 500, so they don't have to pay a monthly fee. Verifone 500, none of that. So that's their early jump. But then you start to get into this mishmash where you start to actually transition into other people's water, right? Does Square want to be the actual best point of sale company? Because now you have major incumbents in the space that have been in this industry for 30 years, and it's not an easy sell, right? It's a totally different business. And then I look at guys like make sure we learn from the past, right? Bump, a great company, right? They raised $20 million, Mountain View, funded by some of the best, and acquired by Google. Google shut it down about 3 months later. For all intents and purposes, this technology never created enough value in the world to make it interesting. I think the guys are probably working on other things now. What can guys who actually have an opportunity to pivot or change, companies like Level Up, companies like, Square, virtually everyone in the space has the ability to make major decisions right now. They can go in, they can drink out other people's water, or they can stick to their own. Square in large part has diversified their offering, right? And Square Cash and Marketplace and the dongle and everything else. And sure, a lot of that may come from, board decisions and other influencers. But a lot of smaller companies have the ability to pivot. And that's where I think it'd be really interesting, and maybe Faisal too, to give your perspective across the world, because we're not just the United States, where there actually is opportunity that people just don't see. Skrill, great company. Even SumUp. SumUp is Square for the rest of the world. Not a lot of people know about SumUp, but
the basic premise for me at least is killing time, being able to make the time go down to zero for a payment. eBay, PayPal had the same thing. Overnight shipment was available for the goods, but it took 2 days for the check to get there. So if I can get the money now, I'll ship it right now and you'll have it tomorrow, Same thing happened with Starbucks and coffee, Getting money out to pay for a coffee took time. So if you could somehow get a card or what have you.
True.
But killing
Absolutely.
time. And I think right now the biggest challenge is, this is what the Ripple protocol does on top of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is still 10 minutes and you got to wait for 30 minutes for transaction ledger to show your transactions. Ripple says, well, guess what? I've improved the protocol. Instantaneous settlement of funds. I think you'll see the same thing happening with cross-border payments. If I want to send money to someone else, far away, it should be instantaneous. And that's what these companies are trying to find out. Where is the problem? Where can I go in and put some sort of a solution where I reduce the time down to the absolute minimum that I can do with my wallet, what have you, and solve a problem. And the other problem is that there has to be a large enough transaction set for that company to sustain itself. I mean, PayPal had the advantage with, they went into 190 countries, although they were not operating in 190 countries, but, nonetheless, they were there. And they solved this problem. You want to get paid for logo design services? Well, here's your PayPal. You got the money. Where's my logo?
It's so about speed. That brings up a great point. What is the future? What is the absolute fastest way? Klinkle, a company that's unlaunched.
I don't think so. There's going to be a single solution because
I agree totally.
And monopolistic rules, the competition authority, what have you, will prevent that. And it'll always. I think you'll have. Companies will start looking at problem sets. Remittance is one thing. This is what Zoom is doing in the remittance space. Remittance is a huge industry. I mean, just between U.S. and Mexico, there's such a huge opportunity, and still it's not instantaneous. It's instantaneous if you look at it, the Western Union model, but there's so much money that can be saved because the cost of transaction is so high. It's still about 5% on average. But I think saving time and looking at a very particular set of problems and saying, well, I want to enter the coffee business, be able to pay so smoothly and be able to shave that time off. Someone will say, well, I want to enter the taxi business, the transportation business, and be able to pay smoothly. So I don't have to, if my bill is so-and-so and I'll just pay so-and-so. I think some company will, the reason your landlord is accepting Venmo is because he can get paid instantaneously.
Yes.
He doesn't have to wait for a check and so forth. That's the only reason he's accepting it. And I think the same thing will happen with large supermarkets. What if Walmart could accept Venmo? I'm just giving you an example. You walk out, $20 is your bill, you scan a code, paid, done, out. If you shave off 15 or 18 seconds or 25 seconds of the checkout process, imagine what Walmart saves, how many more shoppers it can accommodate, etc., and so forth. So I think it's all about shaving time as far as I'm concerned.
And what technologies what technologies do you think are going to enable that? Do you think high frequency sound, Bluetooth, bump, I think failed. They were fast, but they still failed for personal reasons.
It's that snowball effect. Something will take off. More. It's like if you go on Quora, you'll see an answer. It's got 1,000 upvotes, and you'll read it and you'll upvote it. But if you scroll down, you'll see there was an even better answer, but it only has 100 upvotes. It never got the traction. It's like the VHS
critical
versus
mass.
The beta, tape and so forth. It'll be like the vinyl versus the CD and so forth. Something critical mass. Absolutely, it'll just snowball, and you have no control over it. You could have the best solution out there, but guess what? People decided to adopt for something else.
I'll introduce the landlord concept again here. If one owns the technology, the software, the hardware, the phone, they get to control a great deal of the experience. And when they start getting interested in payments, they might find that the other squatter is on the land, so to speak. It's time for them to move on. What technology do I think is going to make a big impact? I think the big impact is going to be iBeacons. And we all know what iBeacons is about. iBeacons is about communication. It's about local communication. Now, the question is, will iBeacons jump the chasm? Will it make sense financially for a business to invest in this technology? Well, Apple might make it so simplistic for the merchant that they're going to jump into it head forth. So we have to keep an eye on that technology. So what is an iBeacon? It can be anything from BLE to sonics to magnetics to Wi-Fi. It's going to be a combination of things, maybe NFC also. So I think that's one of the things that we need to keep an eye on.
So is it really the quickness of the information on the front end to go from, gadget to gadget essentially? Or is it the underlying payment infrastructure that allows it to happen quickly?
Well, let's look at this again from the perspective of over 50% of the population. All right, when I went to Target last night to pick something up, I made an observation of who was around me. Target is a great lens because it's a family store. Typically, you're going to find families in there. And I was watching who's paying. And even though they may be full families there, I'm watching the wife or the female or the girlfriend, whatever her position is, put their pocketbook on the little ledge there and pull out a credit card or a payment card, whatever type of card you're talking about. By the time the checkout person had the bags done, the transaction was done. So it didn't slow down the line, one iota, because you can, in Target, you can start swiping the credit card the moment the first item is rung through the USP scanner. So what do we have there? We have something that's fundamentally not broken. Now, if I came to Target and I said, I'd like to change this paradigm and have everybody pay with their name, you know, the people, especially the people working the register, for example, would say, what am I going to solve by that? Well, the person doesn't have to take something out of their wallet. Say, I see, but that has no impact on slowing down my line. We already solved that problem. Now, that's Target. And Target is Target's got a lot of problems today, but they're the extreme example. You go to Apple, same type of scenario is taking place. Apple's been studying this far longer than most of us have realized. In fact, I can tell you this without any confidence being violated here. Apple developed the iBeacon based upon their own internal research at their own stores. And I will assert even further, and this will become very material in the next few months. Apple's entire scheme of how they're going to approach payments is going to be seen as organically grown from their own experiences selling to consumers. Their square foot of retail space is the most valuable square foot of retail space on the planet. Consistently, no matter where these stores are, they are fundamentally magnitudes higher, earning more income per square foot. So they're experts. So, you know, when we talk about empiricism and empirical study,
but they're human.
Everybody thinks, no, of course they're human. They're going to make tremendous numbers of mistakes. But let me tell you though, when we talk about, well, Apple's not doing this empirical research. I had a VC who I met with yesterday. He was, well, we like each other. We're great conversation, but he loves being contrarian. And he threw the gauntlet down and said, okay, you know, you're telling me all about this research and you're right. We're screwing it up, was his words, in the Silicon Valley, because the mentality is right now.
You can't tell us who this was?
No, I absolutely can't. I absolutely can't. But I can tell you that we've been having this high-level dialogue. He discovered me through Quora and actually had a lot of choice words over my original postings that I was reading. He said, you know, I don't buy this guy. Where is he coming from? And obviously there was a shift because a lot of the things I was saying bore fruit. But anyway, he said, you know, Apple doesn't do this research. Point to me where Apple's doing research in payments. And again, once you reveal the reality, let's see who winds up running Apple payments. I can tell you, it's an executive that ran Apple Retail. Okay. Yeah. Now, why is that? Because that's empiricism at work. They know better than anybody else what was working and what wasn't working. So they actually deployed iBeacons in their store, and they've been utilizing them for quite some time. A lot of people don't know how to read into this.
Here's a little insight, though, Brian. I have a good friend who works at the Genius Bar in Santa Monica, Apple, which is, I think, one of the largest in California, outside maybe Mountain View.
It's top 3 locations.
San Francisco. And he says no one uses it. So you have the ability to go into a store and scan it with your phone, you know, open up the app, scan it with the iPhone, whatever you're buying, and just walk out. And he says, we get less than 1% of people ever even opening the app while they're in the store. And, you know, he looks at it and, you know, maybe it's not a loss, right? They're not necessarily pushing it or marketing it as much as they could have. But it was interesting to hear that.
Mike, I need to shift your frame of reference from a startup founder to a scientist. A true scientist has no investment on whether or not something is going to work or not. The failure is actually more important than the success. The failure is defining the direction of your empirical study. Apple knew before they even implemented this what its result would be because they've tested other systems. This is a confirmation of a lot of different things. And it's not the most obvious confirmation. Okay, we're going to build this little functionality into our app, and then we're going to prove that it fails. No, it's much more nuanced than that. Could I have told you that a lot of people are not going to pay with their phone at the Apple Store? Ground zero of technologically elite, the cutting edge in this country are buying Apple products. They're not using it. These are the very same people who get the gestation to become founders. And it seems like, well, that's a simple thing. Is when you become a fly on the wall at Apple stores, and I've spent untold hours studying buying patterns and all types of things, emotional states, anthropology and sociology studies of Apple buyers. What you notice is there is no friction in pulling out a credit card at an Apple store. So now you must say, okay, if Apple's going to get in payments, oh my gosh, it's not going to be in the way we thought. And that's entirely right. That's why it's taking so long.
Yeah.
All right. That's why there's a lot of study, because we're all going after the central casting, call up what a payment transaction is going to look like on a mobile phone. And what does it look like? Well, friction-free, a QR code. Now, does that mean that sometimes it works in some settings? Absolutely. The most successful wallet in the United States is Starbucks. And it uses the most low-end technology, optics. And when this was being developed by a guy who is now, strangely enough, working at Apple, Ben, he eliminated NFC. He eliminated all these other things. And again, this has nothing to do with the politics of NFC versus EMV versus swipe. That's infantile debates, okay? And a lot of people love it. It becomes a lot of Twitter fodder, and you get a lot of high-profile payment executives saying this will never happen and that's never going to happen. Fine. I'm not participating. What I am saying is Ben created a system in a vacuum of Starbucks. Didn't care about what the greater world was saying. He looked at the lowest common denominator. And at the time, he was predicting the arrival of the smartphone with a high enough resolution screen to make the three-dimensional scanner, and it's not really truly a QR code, let's just call it a three-dimensional code, work correctly. And he did it, all right? It wasn't perfect, but it is now the most successful wallet system. Now, a lot of people want to duplicate that in the greater world, saying, well, let's take the Starbucks wallet and bring it out to the rest of the world.
Yeah,
well, a lot of people have tried it.
Yeah.
Well, the basic of any payment system is going to be very simple. Person A has to pay person B. They've been doing that for hundreds of years. It was, barter before, gold coins, silver, wheat, feathers, seashells, what have you. We are now in the era of credit cards, plastic, cash, and we've morphed into, digital payments. I think this generation is going to have previous generation, if you will have a little hard time letting go of the wallet. Once the wallet is gone and the digital wallet is, the physical wallet will eventually die off. And once the digital wallet is truly implemented, then it's just a matter of traction. Who will make the best alliances? Who will figure out a more easier way still to make payments at a lesser cost will probably win the game. I don't see, you're right. Very small arguments when we say, is coin, look at yourself. I think we had a podcast a couple of weeks ago when you talked about coin and you talked about your Black American Express card and how you use it at Four Seasons, was it? And you get a better, attention, service.
No doubt.
How will the digital wallet, replace that remains to be seen. And you are not going to let go of that card so easily. Your kids may, but not you certainly. Not in the near future.
Well, let me assert this point, and I fully agree with you, Faisal. I think the wallet is transitioning to, maybe a zero effect. But there's something that is really an impediment, and this is the thing that technologists really have to get a grip on. As long as I need to carry an identity card, let's call it a driver's license, I'm going to carry in something that I'm going to protect it in, and it's going to probably be called a wallet. Now, that wallet may or may not be thinner because I may not be carrying as much cash. I may not be carrying enough cards. But again, let's go to 50% of the population generally, and you ask them, okay, what do you carry in your wallet?
Cash, all cash. And that's
right.
And that's the parallel economy. You cannot forcefully transition onto the digital economy.
Unless there's an incentive. See, and you talked about that incentive. What was the incentive within Starbucks? And we talked about this in the last show. It was loyalty. The reason why a lot of people moved to the wallet was an easier avenue to connect the loyalty with payments. And they did it successfully. Now, that's a moving target. Will that be a successful movement in the future? Let me tell you something. This is going to be an eye-opener for a lot of people. 3 of the top executives at Starbucks are in charge of the future of the payments of that company. This is unheard of. It is just unprecedented for a company, a publicly traded company that large, to have made this movement. It just took place over the last 2 weeks. Publicly, I think last week it came out. And I knew this shift was underfoot for quite a while because of a lot of reasons I can't talk about. But reality is, this is a CEO function. At a major corporation, payments is a CEO function. Now, the CEO of Starbucks used to sit on a board of a payments company. He no longer sits there. He used to sell the card readers at his store. He no longer sells those card readers. Infer what you will from that. But what I can tell you is that is how intricately important it is, foundationally important it is to Starbucks moving into the future. Now, again, what am I really saying? Well, every single merchant can duplicate what Starbucks has done to a greater or lesser extent. And the technologists of the world, us, the people who are shaping the future, completely miss that. So we started this show talking about how could person-to-person payments get involved in all this? Well, I think we need to sort of eliminate this whole concept of segregating it into person-to-person payments and commercial payments. And in fact, just like mobile and web and PC and tablet, they're merging. They're merging into a conglomerate where if you want to cut the pie 90 times to get to the atom, in that regard, you're almost wasting your time. Now we take a step back and say, okay, so person-to-person payments is commercial payments is person-to-person. Right. It's transitionary, and that's the beauty of Square. The amazing work that was done at that company in phase 1 of their growth was I identified the micro merchant, and they laser focused on that, and they did phenomenally well. Future, another story, many shows, but that's what they did so intimately well, is they focused on that aspect, and they did not make a difference between you buying my futon out of my backyard off of Craigslist, or you paying for an espresso, or paying for a chiropractic adjustment on your back.
True.
So that product didn't segregate the market into person to person versus. That's exactly where the future of this is going. So if I was Brian, a merchant, that's where I'd be looking.
I got a question for you, each one of you, and then we'll wrap this up. Which company is going to be the best peer-to-peer company? And give me a 1-sentence answer as to why. So choose one, choose wisely, and tell me why.
I know my answer. The company is not into payments yet, but I know my answer. And the answer is Facebook. And I think can sum it up. They got 1 billion people. And I know that they're working on it. I've got friends there, and etc. And I know they're cracking the code. And once the code is cracked, they will be able to do P2P payments across the world seamlessly, fully compliant, regulatory. And I think that'll be a huge disruptor.
I concur. Faisal and I are in exactly the same territory. Facebook is going to be the company to beat if you want to signify this as purely traditional person-to-person payments. I'll back that up by saying the transport mechanism may not be Facebook. It may be an algorithmic currency.
Yeah, most likely.
And that's let's just briefly touch upon this. Algorithmic currencies are transport mechanisms, right? And so is Western Union. So was the Knights Templar. They were transport mechanisms. Money didn't really move around. The concept of money was transported. So what the underlying system is, it's open up. I think companies that are really wise are going to de-invest in creating their own transport systems and look at organically what's rising up.
Okay.
And will it be specifically Bitcoin? I don't know. Maybe.
I'm gonna say worldwide. Sum up is my bet.
They're doing really well, Mike.
I met the founder, Daniel Klein, same founder as Skrill, essentially PayPal for the rest of the world. And man, their team is just rocking. They've got incredible traction. They've got a vision for how to implement their system across other countries and banking infrastructure, and they had the the skills and ability and traction shown by their history with Skrill to do it.
Okay, guys, take care.
Wonderful show. Take care.
Tomorrow.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
All right.